some more details from our economics editor Faisal Islam, who's here with me now. Faisal.
Thanks, Tina. This was never going to be a budget with new policy, but the new numbers announced today at the spring statement were released in the shadow of profound economic uncertainty from events abroad, with tumbling stock markets. And as the Chancellor stood up, another day of spiralling gas prices, which at one point were 50% again, doubling to £1.70 per third. Biggest rise since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's about halfway up to those levels that caused havoc with bills 4 years ago. But it did fall back a bit in later trading. This, for reference, is what the forecast published today assumes over the coming year, just 71 pence its way out. Now, domestic energy bills will still fall next month, but if, a big if, these levels were continued for several weeks, in July that could mean the equivalent of £500 on typical annual bills. So events abroad loom large over all the numbers, says the author of the forecast.
This is all an increase in cost to the UK. It is a hit to the standard of living in the UK. It's not fiscally in any way helpful, partly because you've then got some welfare benefits that are uprated in line with inflation, so it costs the government, doesn't generate any more revenue. It's pretty much bad whichever way you look at it.
The Chancellor highlighted the decrease in the amount she would have to borrow in the coming years to fund public services held by lower interest rate hard debts and surging stock markets until this week's course. Government borrowing falls to 2% of the size of the economy over the next few years, has been much higher than this, 5 or 10% since the pandemic. It's actually lower than the average of the G7 economies from this year for the first time in more than 2 decades. Now, on the all-important growth in the economy, a mixed bag. The last forecast is here in the darker bars, today's forecast in the light green. This year, a downgrade after a disappointing end to last year, but growth slightly higher in the subsequent years. With lower migration, per person growth has improved a bit, but this is basically flat, and led to claim and counterclaim in the comments.
Stability in our public finances, interest rates and inflation falling, living standards rising, more children lifted out of poverty, more appointments in our NHS, more investment in our infrastructure, a growing economy and more money in the pockets of working people.
She speaks of stability. What planet is the Right Honourable Lady on? She has learned from putting up taxes to destroying growth, to destroying headroom, to coming back to putting up more taxes, more growth destroyed. Round and round we go.
The Lib Dems and Plaid Cymru said the statement was a missed opportunity to make new policy to boost the economy. Reform UK said increases in fuel duties should be scrapped, and the SNP criticised the Chancellor for not axing the energy windfall tax. The Green Party said more help was needed for poorer families. The challenges of higher debt, ambitious assumptions about public spending, and highs in the tax take remain. And today's figures do pose the same question about how to jumpstart relatively sluggish UK growth. We're promised a new plan from the Chancellor later this month, but a plausible energy shock would risk pushing inflation, borrowing and growth in the wrong direction at the same time. Tina.
Faisal, thank you. The war has almost entirely halted shipping traffic through one of the most important routes in the world for global oil and gas supplies. Well, tonight, Donald Trump says if necessary, the United States Navy will begin escorting tankers through the sea passage. Our business editor, Simon Jack, is with me. And Simon, can you give us some insight into why the US has announced this now and what might happen to prices?
Well, simply put, the longer that Strait of Hormuz remains shut, the longer this inflationary shock goes on and the more permanent these price rises will be. We're already seeing it in some obvious places. Say, for example, petrol prices have already crept up a couple of pence. That's largely to do with price rises leading up to these events. It'll take a couple of weeks for 5, 6, 7 pence to come through on the forecourt. You heard Faisal there talking about heating prices, obviously gas heating homes. Gas also directly impacts the price of electricity. People are mainly protected until July by the price cap, but there are some things that aren't, like heating oil, for example, very popular in Northern Ireland, Scotland. Prices there up 25% in Northern Ireland. I've got one viewer who said they got a 40% rise in their heating oil bill. Petrol, of course, as I've mentioned, and that goes into transport, and it goes deeper than that. Gas and other crude oil products go into fertiliser, so that goes into food prices, and then transporting them there. So you're seeing these inflationary impacts potentially growing all over the place. Now, the longer this goes on, the more that sticks, that inflation, which is why Donald Trump wants to get that passage open as soon as possible. How much it's inflationary will depend, as I say, exactly on how long, but it's already beginning to make markets think that an interest rate cut that they're expecting in 2 weeks' time, that is much less likely to happen. So as you can see, the dots you can join between what's going in the Straits of Hormuz and the price of your next mortgage.
Okay, Simon Jack, thank you very much. Time now for a look at the weather. Here's Thomas.
Tina, thank you. Well, I'm pleased to say it's quiet on the weather front, and in fact, fine weather on the way for most of us tomorrow with sunshine. Not the case everywhere, though. There is thicker cloud currently across some northwestern parts of the UK, but this high pressure will be dominating the scene, I think, at least in the short term, so dry for the bulk of the UK. Now, here's the forecast for the night. There's that high pressure. It's actually centred in the North Sea and across the Low Countries, but close enough to influence our weather. But here in the west, we do have thicker cloud and some outbreaks of rain, mostly fleeting, moving from Ireland northwards and into southwestern parts of Scotland. Quite chilly in the north, but in the south it's going to be relatively mild, 9 degrees on the south coast of England. And I think the southerly breeze will keep thicker cloud here in the northwest, but across the bulk of England and Wales, apart from the early morning mist and murk, which will eventually clear, it is looking absolutely beautiful, a stunning day. I mean, look at these temperatures, 17 in London and widely into the mid-teens. A little bit harsher for our friends in the Northern Isles, around 7 degrees Celsius. Now, here's the forecast for Thursday. The high pressure slips away a little bit further towards the east, which does allow this weather front to creep ever closer. So that does mean that across western areas of the UK on Thursday, we will have some outbreaks of rain. So it does mean you might need your brolly in Belfast and perhaps in western Scotland. But ahead of the weather front, the air's coming in from the south. I wouldn't be surprised if in London temperatures reach 19 degrees. That's a conservative estimate there of 17. But here in the northwest, fresher Atlantic air arrives, so it's only around 10 Celsius in Northern Ireland. Now, this is the outlook then into the weekend. Looks a bit of a mixed bag. You can see some days we've got some sunshine, other days there'll be thicker cloud with some spots of rain.
Thomas, thank you very much. That is it from us. Now it's time for the news where you are. Good night.